Like, what is your definition of narcissism?
So it gets a little more complicated. When we're talking like this, I'm talking about grandiose narcissism, and that's a basic.
There's more than one kind of
yes,
narcissism.
yeah. I'll step back. So when we talk about narcissism in the psychological literature, we're talking about three different things that are related. The first of these is narcissistic personality, and this is a trait, and meaning that people go from a high level to a low level. It's not a clinical disorder. And then this trait, when it's grandiose, we say grandiose narcissism, it's this combination of sense of entitlement and a sense of superiority, but also you get extroversion and drive and ambition, called agentic extroversion. So somebody who's driven and extroverted, but also a little bit self-centered and antagonistic and entitled. So that combination of traits, kind of a prima donna or, overconfident or cocky or whatever you want to call it, that's what we talk about is grandiose narcissism. And that's just a normal trait. There's another form of narcissism, which we don't talk about as much in the normal world, but that's vulnerable narcissism. And these are the folks that are kind of think they're really important, think they should be getting a lot of attention, think they're the smartest people in the room, but no one really looks at them, no one pays attention to them. So they get insecure, they get depressed, their self-esteem drops, they think, why am I getting the attention I deserve? I'm kind of a legend. So legend in their own minds. So it's like basement narcissists, living in their mom's basement, thinking how great they are and fantasizing about it. And those more vulnerable folks, you don't see at the bars as much because they're in the basement, but you see them clinically because they're depressed and they go see a clinician and say, help me out, I'm anxious. So those are the two normal forms of narcissism, their traits. And then there's this clinical form or psychiatric form called narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. And that personality disorder form of narcissism is an extreme form of narcissism. You have a high level of it, like Trump or, a lot of people, celebrities or, academics. But you also, to make it a clinical disorder, you have to have that impairment we're talking about. So it has to be clinically significant impairment. And that's usually, the narcissism is so bad, your marriage, your relationships are falling apart. Your work life could be falling apart. So sometimes you find narcissistic, really successful people in offices who are narcissists, but they kind of destroy the office culture. They're just bad workers. And so you can destroy that. You can make really poor decisions because your ego's so big. You just, overinvest in something and it just doesn't work out for you. So you start dysregulating your financial decisions. So you can make those kind of mistakes. The big ones are usually interpersonal. But when you have that kind of impairment, it can be a disorder and then you get treated for it.
The vulnerable personality disorder is fascinating.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating one because you see a lot of that on social media in particular, right? You see people that feel like they should be getting more attention than they are and don't understand why and feel upset by that or shortchanged.
Social media is such a strange beast because it gives everybody the chance to have a camera and have the audience of a billion people. So I could go on there and get a billion audience. But I have to earn that. And so you have lots of people that go, look, I can have a billion people in my audience, but I don't have those people. Why aren't they there? Who's screwing me over and not giving where are my followers?
Yeah.
Why
I saw
am I
a guy
getting
the other
followers?
day talking about being shadow banned, and he had 1,000 friends. And I'm like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure you're shadow banned? Are you sure people are just not interested in what you're saying?
And maybe you're just not that interesting.
But that's the weirdest thing to ever say. Like, I'm being shadow banned. Like, do you have evidence of this? Like, what is happening here?
Well, you're kind of an outlaw.
This is not saying that shadow banning is not real, but like people are using that as an excuse for why they're not getting the attention that they deserve.
Right. I would be the next Joe Rogan if it weren't for those dastardly shadow banners taking me down,
back.
holding me back.
They know that they can't silence me.
They can't. Yeah. That if I got out there, I would change the world. But these guys are holding me back.
Yeah,
and you can see how that turns into like a delusional system. If you get with sort of more schizophrenia, where there's a whole world of people out there trying to hold me down.
Yeah, I want to get to that too. I wanted to ask you if schizophrenia. We might as well get to it right now. Is there a connection between schizophrenia and narcissism? Because many people who are schizophrenic have these grandiose ideas of who they are or who they should be or where they fit in that are these ridiculously distorted perceptions of reality.
Yeah. So grandiosity you can see with narcissism. With the I have this fantasy about how great I am, this illusion, but it's usually within the scope of reality. So if I'm talking to somebody narcissistic, they're like, I'm a 10, I'm pretty awesome. I'm like, not really, man. You're just not. You're okay, but like maybe go back to the gym, But it's usually not. It's not crazy.
Right.
I was working in a hospital with a woman who was a patient who said that she was the tooth fairy, and she worked for Reagan as the tooth fairy. I thought, well, that's a grandiose delusion. Reagan wasn't president, but he was still helping her behind the scenes. That's a grandiose delusion, but you wouldn't call that narcissistic because her personality was really narcissistic. She was more schizophrenic in her presentation, kind of flat affect, a little bit strange, odd or unusual. Anhedonia, sort of lack of feeling and stuff, but those weird delusions. So you can have those grandiose delusions, but it's not quite the same as narcissism. It seems to be working a little differently. And the other place you see them is mania with like bipolar disorder. People get really manic and they get these manic phases and they're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to build this, I'm going to take over this, my record's going to be the best. And that mania can look like narcissism too. And those are probably more closely linked.
The psychological disorders that we're aware of, the ones like narcissism, the ones like schizophrenia, like, do we know what's happening in the mind that causes a distortion of reality? Is it ego protecting you from the truth? Is it a chemical imbalance? Is it a series of things that all coincide? Like when you have someone who's both a narcissist and possibly schizophrenic.
With narcissism, it's very hard to detect anything that's sort of clearly biological. And this is true for all personality, really. People have been looking at this last 5 years pretty hard for sort of biomarkers or neural structures. You don't really see them very clearly. You do with schizophrenia. There's some.
What is it with
schizophrenia? I was going to say, it's not my area. And actually, Jamie, if I say anything wrong, just check me and call me out because I don't want to screw up anything.
It's the best one-handed Google on earth.
Please do that. Because there's old stuff about kind of plaque in the brain and things like with Alzheimer's. You see some missing neural structure, but that's just out of my area. But with personality, you generally don't see it in there. You just can't find it so far. And when you look at genetics, you know it's in the genes, but there's no single genes. It's like swarms of genes.
So it isn't. So if your father is a narcissist, are you more or less likely to be a narcissist?
More.
But what if you learn from your father? Like, my God, my father's ruined his life. Like many alcoholics have children that won't touch liquor, and I've known quite a few of them.
Yeah. So in the clinical literature, they talk about that as sort of that identify with them, or you do the opposite of the father. So the alcoholic father, like you said, you become a teetotaler, or your father's a narcissist, you become really nice.
Yeah.
We don't really see that. What you tend to see, I mean, I say it doesn't happen because I know it happens, but what you tend to see in the literature with these big family studies is that traits like narcissism and all personality and really all mental disorders, they tend to follow family lines, so they're heritable. But it's not really clear how that happens.
So whether it's nurture or nature.
Right. I mean, it's in there, but we don't know exactly what the genes are. And when they start to look at the nurture question with a lot of personality, what you find is about, and when they break these down into heredity coefficients, they don't mean exactly what they sound, but generally you find it's about 50-60% heritable, you're born with it, it's probably genetic, and maybe 10% is parenting, and maybe the other 30-40% is something in the environment. It's just not really clear what it is.
The environment.
Yeah,
really?
just random environment. So that's why you have kids, and I have two daughters. They're very different people. Part of that's genetics, obviously, they're very different, but it's also their environment. I might have been a similar parent to both of them, but they have different.
Well, I guess we can stay there. Initially, I was just going to share as a joke. I mean, these 3 hour long podcasts, they tend to drag on. So I was just sharing here. 2 times speed on YouTube allows you to get through them at twice the speed. But interestingly enough, I was just going to share his definition for narcissism, but then he went on and literally jumped into my wheelhouse. And if you listen to him when he's talking about, at first I was like, oh, well, I hope he mentions mania when it comes to narcissism and these grandiose ideas. But what I loved, what he jumped to immediately after, was talking about where these grandiose ideas come from. And he's talking about the ego. Then he goes on and talks about, well, where does these things come from? Are they genetic? Are they nurture? Are they environment? Now, having studied this, I know when he's talking about it's like 50, and he's literally just saying we are the predisposition to these sorts of narcissism, ego. This is exactly what I've been talking about in my podcast, right? The issue here is inherent, innate in every single human being. What is this source, this cause? It's not genetics. It's not nature. In a sense, it is all of the above, because it's a human nurturing. Our environment is revolving around ourselves because we perceive our environment from within. And finally, is it genetic? Yeah, it is, in a sense that if your father is arrogant, you're more likely to be arrogant because you are possibly genetically similar, but just plain and simple, you're around them all the time. But it doesn't always happen. The reason why I laugh, my father was narcissistic in a way, but not terrible. My brothers, whoa, they just thought they were God's gift. And then there was me, who my entire life I've really kind of, I don't know, underpromised. So once again, here this doctor, he seems very intelligent and interesting, but he seems to not have an answer, which is not uncommon in science and healthcare nowadays. But he seems so jaded as a doctor that, well, we don't know the answer. But did he really look at the data to see that none of these causes or influences can be directly attributed? Therefore, it is none of those. Could it be possible that this premise that we are the source as well as the solution to our own suffering in life? Ego is the source of this narcissism. Not completely, as Joe Rogan said, because of, we don't want to tell ourselves and all this other jazz, but also, yes, that is the reason why, because our ego doesn't want us to understand what an incredible effect it has on us and the damage, right? Narcissist, as he says, it depends. I love how he talked about that, how narcissism itself only becomes a condition. Never is it identifiable as far as chemical or any sort of metric that he can test for. But when people's lives start to be impinged by their narcissism, that's when it becomes a disorder. I find that interesting. So ego is only a problem when it starts to screw with our lives. Well, give me an example where our ego doesn't screw with our life. So are we all narcissistic, or is narcissism just a human trait? Some people are hedonistic and they take it too far. Other people are austere and you don't see that aspect in their personality. I argue it is resident in all of us. Take it as you wish.